How does a nation go from just an idea, written down on paper, to the world's single most powerful country in just a couple of centuries? Well, that's the incredible story of the United States. And today we're going to trace that journey from a declaration of principles all the way to global dominance. It really all begins with these famous words. Thomas Jefferson himself said the goal wasn't to invent some radical new philosophy. He wanted to present the common sense of the subject, in plain, simple terms, to create what he called an expression of the American mind. So you see, this wasn't just a declaration. It was a carefully crafted argument for a whole new kind of nation. So let's break down how that argument was actually put together to convince not just the colonists, but the entire world.
Okay, so the case was laid out in three very logical parts. First, you have the preamble, which establishes this big idea of universal rights. Second, a long list of grievances. This is basically the evidence, right? It details all the ways the king had violated those rights. And all of that leads to the final logical conclusion, the formal declaration that the colonies had no other choice but to become free and independent.
So with the idea established, the next phase for the country was all about physical growth. We're talking about an expansion across the continent at a speed and scale that the world had literally never seen before.
And the engine behind this incredible expansion was a powerful idea called manifest destiny. This was the core belief that the United States had a God-given mission to spread its great experiment of liberty all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It was a really potent ideology, one that would be used to justify pushing westward, often with a heavy human cost.
But an idea alone is never enough. There were very practical things pulling settlers west. You had the promise of rich, fertile soil out in Oregon, the massive lure of gold in California, and the deep desire for religious freedom. And government policies, like the Preemption Act, just poured fuel on that fire. So in the end, this expansion was really driven by this powerful mix of divine mission and pure economic ambition. So as the nation's borders are getting bigger, its economy is going through a massive transformation. But all of this rapid industrial growth was about to face its biggest test yet.
And that test was the Wall Street crash of 1929, which set off a devastating global depression. As you can see here, things like overproduction and wild speculation in the market led to absolute catastrophe. By 1933, unemployment in the U.S. had shot up to an almost unimaginable 25%. I mean, 1 in every 4 workers was jobless. The nation's economic engine had completely seized up.
In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt launched his famous New Deal, and the very first priority was simple: immediate relief for the millions of people who were suffering. You had programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put hundreds of thousands of young men to work in forests and parks. Then there was the Federal Emergency Relief Act, which funneled cash to states to create jobs, really any jobs, just to get people working and earning a paycheck again. Okay, so after relief, the next step was recovery. Now this wasn't about temporary fixes anymore. This was about getting the core sectors of the economy, like agriculture and industry, back up and running for the long haul.
The Agricultural Adjustment Acts, for instance, actually paid farmers to produce less, which sounds counterintuitive, but it helped get crop prices to stabilize. And the Public Works Administration kicked off these huge infrastructure projects. We're talking roads, bridges, dams that created jobs and modernized the whole country at the same time.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle: reform. The main goal here was to build safeguards right into the economic system to make sure a crisis of this scale could never, ever happen again. And this is where we see a lasting legacy that really redefined the role of government in America. The FDIC was created to ensure bank deposits, which helped restore people's faith in the whole financial system. And of course, the Social Security Act created a national safety net for the unemployed and the elderly, something that's now a permanent part of American life.
So the New Deal, combined with the massive industrial effort for World War II, really set the stage for America's next chapter, a period of such incredible global dominance that it became known as the American Century.
Think about it. After World War II, the United States was in a completely unique position. While the industrial centers of Europe and Asia were basically in ruins, American factories were untouched and running at full blast. The U.S. was pretty much the only major power left with its economy intact, ready to supply and rebuild the rest of the world.
Now that economic power was matched by military might all through the Cold War. But the real pivot point came in 1991. With the collapse of its main rival, the Soviet Union, the Cold War ended, and the United States was left all alone at the top, the undisputed sole superpower on the entire planet.
So what does that kind of power look like today, just in terms of raw numbers? Well, the scale is pretty staggering.
Let's start with military power. In 2023, the U.S. was responsible for almost 40% of all global defense spending. To put that into perspective, that's more than the next 9 countries combined.
Economically, that dominance is still there. The U.S. economy generates over a quarter of the entire world's GDP. And when you look at the world of finance, American capital markets make up more than half of the planet's total stock market value. I mean, the numbers really speak for themselves.
This entire journey from a radical idea of liberty to a global superpower is truly one of history's most remarkable stories. But it leaves us with a critical question for today. In a world filled with new challenges and rising powers, what does it truly mean to be a superpower in the 21st century? And maybe more importantly, what will it take to remain one?